When you serve as pastor of a local church, over time, you begin to pick up on some things. Not everything, but some things. And one of the things that you begin to pick up on is that there are different kinds of people in the church. And it's not just one church, it's not just this church, it's all the churches. You can put different kinds of people in different categories, but at the end of the day, there are two categories that really everybody falls into one or the other. The first one is the group of people who think that God is extraordinarily fortunate to have them in church. Don't look around. These folks think that they're the best thing to happen to God since sliced bread happened to us. And he should be so grateful and so excited because we couldn't survive without them. Then there's another group, kind of on the other end of the spectrum. And these are the folks who can't imagine God using them according to his purposes. They kind of walk through life thinking, God could never use me. God, not even that he can't, that he won't. That he's uninterested in reproducing the outworking of his purposes in my life. And there may be different reasons for this. It might be because the magnitude of their sin and darkness is so prominent. Like how could God use me given the things I've done? You wouldn't believe how many people have said that to me over the last 17 and a half years. How can God use someone who's done all the stuff I've done? That's one reason. Other people are convinced they have nothing to offer. I'm not smart enough to teach a class. I'm not skilled enough to help out with this project. I don't have any money to help with the fundraiser. They just sort of assume that I don't have anything to offer. So whether it's just a lack of anything to give or a lack of confidence that God will use me despite my sinfulness, there's a group of people, and it's not a small group, who are convinced that God either can't use them or that he's uninterested in putting them to work for his purposes. If you're in that first group and you think you're the best thing that happened to the church in recent history, this sermon is not for you. You can listen, that's fine, but there won't be much helpful. If you've ever felt yourself sort of leaning into that second group, though, where you've been like, yeah, I'm not sure the Lord can do that with me. I don't have what it takes. If you've been in that space, maybe not all the time, but sometimes, then Galatians chapter 1 does have something for you. And it's this. God calls unlikely people to do extraordinary things. There's one thing that explodes off the page in Galatians chapter 1. It is that God takes the most unlikely people and puts them to work doing extraordinary things for his kingdom. And not only is he able, it seems like he kind of gets a kick out of it. So the story starts with Paul's story, doesn't it? If Paul is not an unlikely candidate for the greatest church planter in all history, I don't know who is. And he kind of tells his story. I think he gets this, right? There are places in his letters where he calls himself the chief of sinners, where he describes his violent opposition to the gospel earlier in life. I mean, if there's a guy who shouldn't be involved in the spread of the gospel, it's this guy, isn't it? Listen to how he tells his story. He's writing to the Galatians. You've heard, no doubt, verse 13, of my earlier life in Judaism. My reputation precedes me. You've heard, no doubt, of my earlier life in Judaism. And listen to the words he uses to describe that life. I was violently persecuting the church. I was trying to destroy it. Not just trying to slow things down a little bit, not just trying to push back some, not just fighting back. I was trying to destroy the church. When was the last time you met somebody who was willing to say that? And he was particularly gifted in this, wasn't he? I advanced beyond others of my age. I had the right connections. I had the right resources. I had the right credentials. I was really good at violently attempting to destroy the church. And if you read back through Acts, you know that this guy was there when the first Christian martyr, Stephen, was killed. It kind of looks like he was running the show because people are throwing their cloaks at his feet. Just to put things in perspective, we're talking about a guy in the Middle East, Palestine, who for religious reasons kills people. What's the word we use for that today? So if you want to get your head around what Paul was like in his earlier life, he's a religious extremist. And if you're around today, he'd be on a terrorist list. Because he made it a point to kill people who he thought were a danger or a threat to his religion. Does he sound like an unlikely candidate for Christian missionary? I think so. If that doesn't disqualify you, I'm not sure what does. I mean, this guy is the last person they'd go looking for. And he seems to get that too, right? Because when he tells the story, later on, he says, people were saying the one who used to persecute us is now proclaiming the faith. And it's almost like they're saying it in disbelief. Like I've heard this guy, Paul, is out here now proclaiming the faith he once tried to destroy, but I have to see it to believe it. Like they're a little skeptical of that, and for good reason. Maybe they think he's trying to cozy up to them so he can get some insider information and then turn on them when the time is right. Spring the trap. He was untrusted. He was violent. He was an up-and-coming influencer, and he was using all of his power to destroy the church. We'll put him in the unlikely category. He's not the only one in the unlikely category in the New Testament. You read back through the Gospels, all the people Jesus called are in the unlikely category. That's why I say it's not just that he kind of occasionally picks unlikely people, because most of the people in the Gospels who Jesus puts to work are unlikely characters, aren't they? They're not the religious influencers. He doesn't go after the credentialed clergy. He's not, let me get some PhDs and some people with MBAs and some credentials, and let's get some wealthy people in here to bankroll this project. That's not the strategy. You can imagine if a PR guy got hold of Jesus in the first century, he'd have a whole list of things they had to change. You can't start a movement like this. You don't have any money. You don't have any people. Like you just pull those guys off the side of the lake. You don't even, who are they? We should go talk to Paul. We want to start a movement. He knows people. But that's not how Jesus operates, is it? He goes and finds people who have no influence. He goes and finds people who don't have a ton of resources. He goes and finds people who aren't well connected. He says, follow me. I'll teach you how to fish for people. Follow me, I'll teach you how to change the world. I think he gets a kick out of using unlikely people to take the gospel to the nations. So if you ever felt like you're in that unlikely category, you're in good company. Because you're there with Paul, and you're there with Peter, and you're there with James, and you're there with John and the others. They were doubted by their contemporaries, sometimes criticized, I should say, by their opponents as, why does he pick these uneducated guys? Why are they the ones out here leading the movement? Jesus does this. He intentionally and purposefully calls unlikely people to do extraordinary things for the gospel. I think I know why. I think it's the same reason that he picks the Hebrew people, who weren't even a people before he got hold of them, instead of a powerful nation with resources and structure. He picked a bunch of nobodies wandering around in the desert. Said, I'm going to bless every family of the earth through you. Because here's the thing, when God uses unlikely people to bless the nations, it's unlikely that anyone says, you know, this could have happened without God's involvement. Like if he picks unlikely people, then any one watching with their eyes open would have to say, like, this person could not do this on their own. God must be at work. And that's exactly the sort of thing we find in Acts. These uneducated guys, if it's not of God, it'll fizzle out. Because they're not the kind of people who start movements. They're not the kind of people who are successful. They're the most unlikely type to change the world. And that's exactly what happens, isn't it? Because God is with them, because God is present with the Hebrew people in the wilderness and carries them in to the promised land, because God is present in Jesus and gathers his people to nobodies, then unlikely people, the folks you never suspect, become the front lines of the advance of the kingdom of God in the world. Not the power players, the blue-collar guys down by the lake. God calls unlikely people to do extraordinary things for the kingdom. Question is, how do unlikely people become available? So if we're in that space and we're thinking, I'm not sure how God could use me, like I don't have the rhetorical skill, I don't have kind of the Bible knowledge, I've still got this background where people aren't going to trust me because they know the sinful life I've lived in the past. What do I do? Number one, start listening for his call. And don't assume he won't, because he will. He does. If you're in the unlikely category, he's more likely to call you than someone who thinks that he really needs them on board. At least that's been my experience. The folks who think God is lucky to have them on the team, he doesn't go to them when he's got something important to do. So open your ears. That assumption, God can't use me or God won't use me, is like closing off my senses to what he wants to do. Stop it. Don't do that anymore. And ask him, how? God, I see that you use unlikely people. How will you use me? I see that you use nobodies. How will you use me? What do you want me to do?